My daughter-in-law refused to let me hold my grandchild. Then the doctor revealed a truth that shocked the entire family. The air in the hospital room felt thick, smelling of antiseptic and new life. I stood beside the bed, my heart overflowing with a joy I hadn't felt in years. My grandson, a tiny miracle with a shock of dark hair, was crying. He was just minutes old, and his distressed wails were the only sound that mattered. I reached out, my hands trembling slightly with eagerness, my voice a gentle whisper. "Oh, my sweet boy, can I please hold my grandson?" I asked my daughter-in-law, Lydia. I imagined the weight of him in my arms, the perfect curve of his head resting against my chest. It was a moment every grandmother dreams of. But instead of handing him over, Lydia recoiled, clutching the infant tighter to her chest. It was a small, sharp movement, but it was enough to make my blood run cold. My son, Aaron, was looking out the window, his back to me, the picture of studied indifference. I felt a knot of dread tighten in my stomach, sensing the beautiful moment was about to shatter into 1,000 pieces. Point two. Lydia's eyes, usually sharp and calculating, were narrowed into slits of pure hostility. The words that left her mouth were a vicious, icy cut that went straight to the core of me. "Don't touch him!" she hissed, the sound barely a whisper but echoing louder than any shout in the quiet room. Her body language was one of complete protection, as if I were a predator and the baby was her prey. I stood frozen, my extended hands hanging uselessly in the air. The nurse, who had been busy checking the baby's vitals, stopped and glanced nervously between us. Lydia's voice rose, laced with sudden, ugly venom. "You're not allowed near him. You're not family, you're toxic." The lie was so huge, so unfair, that my cheeks instantly burned with shame. Relatives who had been quietly congratulating Aaron now turned and stared, their shocked expressions like physical blows. The baby's cries continued, small and helpless, but no one intervened. Not the nurse, not the proud, quiet relatives, and certainly not my own son, who remained a statue by the window. I felt a desperate need to defend myself, but the words were trapped in my throat, choked by the sudden, crushing public shame. I was being erased right there, in front of the new life I was supposed to welcome. I had to know why she was doing this to me. Before we continue with Gladys's story, hit subscribe to the channel and let us know in the comments where you are listening from. You won't believe the truth the doctor is about to reveal. The silence in the car on the way home was a heavy, suffocating blanket. Every click of the turn signal, every sigh of the engine, seemed painfully loud, highlighting the chasm that had suddenly opened between Aaron and me. He drove with a fixed, careful intensity, his gaze never leaving the road. I felt physically sick, my mind replaying Lydia's cruel words on an endless loop. After what felt like an eternity of agonizing silence, I couldn't bear it anymore. I had to know. "Why, Aaron?" I finally managed to whisper, my voice rough with unshed tears. "Why did she say those things? Why wouldn't you let me hold my grandson?" He didn't look at me. His grip on the steering wheel tightened until his knuckles were white. He cleared his throat, the sound dry and hollow. "It's better this way, Mom," he muttered, his tone flat, devoid of the warmth I remembered. "Lydia thinks you'll contaminate the baby. She's just being protective." Contaminate. The word struck me with the force of a punch. My own son thought I was a threat, a source of illness or filth. I could only repeat the word, the shock absorbing all the pain for a moment. "Contaminate?" I asked, completely bewildered. He offered no explanation, just another long, unbearable silence that confirmed his agreement with his wife's vile accusation. I sat in the cold, dark silence of my kitchen, the clock ticking loudly on the wall, marking the passage of a night I couldn't sleep. The single word, contaminate, had lodged itself in my brain. I knew with every fiber of my being that Lydia was lying. I was healthy. I had regular checkups, and the family doctor had always given me a clean bill of health. But what was the lie exactly? The whispers I'd caught from Aaron and the nurses in the hospital now made a horrible kind of sense. Lydia had been actively spreading a rumor that I carried a secret, genetic illness, something that was supposedly harmless to me but could be passed on and could somehow harm the new baby. It was a total, vicious fabrication designed to turn everyone against me. The horrifying part was that no one had questioned her. They had taken her word, a word steeped in malice, over 25 years of my life as a good, caring mother. I put my head in my hands, tears finally starting to flow, whispering into the empty air. What did I ever do to deserve this? Why is my own flesh and blood doing this to me? The loneliness was absolute. I walked aimlessly through the quiet house, the shadows feeling heavier than usual. My gaze finally settled on a framed, silver-edged photograph on the mantelpiece. My late husband, Richard, smiling back at me, his eyes full of the gentle kindness I missed every day. He was a respected doctor, a man who had built our family's reputation on integrity and service. The name he had made for us was one of honor in our town. "I wish you were here, my love," I whispered, reaching out to touch the glass, my fingertip cold against the smooth surface. "You would know what to do. They've turned our son against me, Richard. They've poisoned his mind with lies." It hurt that the name he had worked so hard to build, a name synonymous with medicine and trust, was now being used by his own daughter-in-law to weave a wicked tapestry of deceit against his widow. I knew that if he were here, he would use his professional influence and his clear, logical mind to unravel this nonsense. But he wasn't. He had been taken too soon, leaving me to face this dark, bewildering betrayal alone. I stood there for a long time, drawing strength from his familiar, steady image, trying to find a sliver of his courage to face the coming fight. The weeks that followed were a blur of isolating pain. It was a deliberate, calculated purge. Lydia blocked my number, turning my once busy phone into a cold, silent object. Aaron, my only son, didn't block me, which was somehow worse. He simply ignored my calls. My desperate texts, pleading for a conversation, sat unanswered in the sterile emptiness of his phone. The isolation was profound and complete. I tried to reach out to a couple of my old friends, but their pitying glances were unbearable. They didn't understand the depth of the lie, and I couldn't bring myself to share the word contaminate. The pity felt like a confirmation of the lie, so I started avoiding them too. My life had shrunk to the four walls of my house and the echoing silence of my kitchen. But as the pain solidified, it began to harden into something else. A quiet, burning resolve. They had tried to break me, but they had only forged me into a steelier version of myself. I looked at the dark windows, my reflection a grim shadow. "No," I vowed softly to the empty room. "They will not erase me. I will fight this." The social cold shoulder I was receiving felt worse than any outright fight. It was a slow, agonizing shunning orchestrated by Lydia. I found myself becoming a pariah in my own community. The betrayal wasn't just coming from my daughter-in-law, it was coming from the silence of my friends and the cold indifference of my son. I went to church, hoping to find solace in routine and faith, but even there, the atmosphere was poisonous. As I knelt to pray, I heard them, the sharp, cruel whispers from the pew behind me. "Apparently, she's sick. Dangerous," one voice hissed. "That's why her own son won't let her near the baby." Can you imagine? The second voice clucked with feigned sympathy. "A hidden genetic thing. The poor child." My hands, clasped tightly in prayer, began to tremble violently. The injustice of it all, the sheer audacity of Lydia's lie and its devastating effectiveness, was almost more than I could bear. But as I rose from the pew, something in my chest snapped. My spine stiffened, and the trembling stopped. The fear was replaced by a cold, surgical focus. They wanted to destroy my name and reputation. I would destroy their lie. I had decided to clean out the study, a room I'd mostly avoided since Richard's death, as a way to find a focus for my restless energy. I was systematically going through his old desk, a large mahogany piece he used for his private paperwork, when my fingers brushed against something stiff tucked into the back of a seldom-used drawer. It was an envelope, sealed with red wax that had the imprint of his old practice logo. The paper felt thick and important. Printed on the front in his own neat, familiar handwriting were the words, "For Gladys, confidential." My heart immediately began to pound, not with fear, but with a sudden, electrifying premonition. I knew, somehow, that this was connected to the dark cloud hanging over me. My hands, no longer trembling with grief but with anticipation, carefully broke the aged wax seal. Inside was a single, official-looking document. It was a DNA test from decades ago, clearly labeled and dated back to when Aaron was just a child. I scanned the results, not understanding the medical jargon, but one thing jumped out at me, cold and clear as ice water. It was Aaron's profile, and next to the field marked father's name, the word stood out, shocking and absolute. Unknown. My mind went completely blank, the world tilting off its axis. Unknown. Not Richard. Not the man who had raised him, loved him, and whose name he carried. The date on the DNA test was right before Richard's sudden death years ago. I stared at the paper, then back at the photograph of my late husband, his kind smile now seeming to hold a silent, profound secret. I felt a dizzying wave of confusion and denial. This couldn't be right. It had to be a lab error or a mistake. But Richard had kept it. He had sealed it, marked it confidential, and hidden it away. Why? I began to realize the implications were monstrous. If this was true, then Aaron was not Richard's biological son. And the lie Lydia was using, the one about my genetic contamination, was not a complete fabrication. She had used this old report, twisted its meaning, and weaponized the truth to destroy me. Her genetic illness claim wasn't about me at all. It was about Aaron's paternity. I pressed the paper to my chest, breathing deeply, the thin hospital paper feeling like a concrete weight. The heartbreak was now laced with the terrifying, sharp tang of a deep, years-old family secret. Suddenly, fragments of a past, long filed away as stress or grief, came rushing back to me, sharper and clearer than any photograph. I remembered Richard's panic behavior in the months leading up to his death. There was a secret, late-night hospital visit he had lied about, claiming it was an emergency consultation. I remembered the fierce, whispered argument he had with someone on the phone in his study, an argument that ended with him slamming the receiver down and looking utterly defeated. He had been distant, pale, and unusually quiet for weeks after that. At the time, I attributed it to the stress of his practice. Now I realized the awful truth. He hadn't been worried about a patient or a colleague. He had been worried about this, about the result of this DNA test. He knew. He had discovered the truth about Aaron's father, and for some reason, had chosen to take the terrible secret to the grave with him, sealing it away to protect me, or perhaps to protect the family name. Now the past was reaching out, its cold hand touching the present. The lies weren't just Lydia's. The wound was deeper, older, and far more catastrophic than I had ever imagined. The truth about Aaron was what Lydia had twisted and used against me, meaning there was something deeper at play. The need for answers was a physical ache, driving me out of the house and straight to the familiar, slightly outdated office of Dr. Patel, Richard's oldest colleague and closest friend. He was retired now, but still kept a small consultation room downtown. I sat across from him, the old DNA report spread between us like a dangerous map. Dr. Patel, a kind man with silver hair and perpetually worried eyes, slowly put on his reading glasses and picked up the document. As soon as he read the date and the results, the color drained from his face. His usual gentle composure fractured. He slammed the paper down on his desk, his hand shaking. "You weren't supposed to see that, Gladys," he muttered, his voice barely audible. Richard asked me to make sure that file disappeared forever. His reaction confirmed my worst fears. This was no lab error. This was a truth Richard had desperately tried to bury. I realized I wasn't just fighting Lydia's lie. I was digging up a secret that had cost my husband his peace and perhaps his life. I had to know the full extent of the deceit. Dr. Patel took a shaky breath, his gaze fixed on the confidential envelope. He explained that years ago, when Aaron was a baby and Richard was just starting his practice, Richard had discovered what he thought was a simple administrative error at the city's main lab. It was a discrepancy in a newborn screening. He had requested a private, follow-up DNA test, the one I was holding, just to be sure. That test revealed the truth. Aaron wasn't his biological son. Richard, terrified of scandal and deeply devoted to me, had decided to quietly destroy the evidence and raise Aaron as his own, never telling a soul. He wanted to fix the error, quietly, Gladys, Dr. Patel explained, his voice heavy with regret. But before he could, Lydia somehow gained access to the original, flawed lab reports years later. She used the ambiguity of the report, the unknown paternity, to invent this grotesque lie about your genetic illness and contamination. My anger burned hotter than before. Lydia hadn't just humiliated me with a lie. She had found Richard's deepest, most painful secret and had weaponized it, twisting it to suit her monstrous narrative of victimhood. The truth was like a series of sharp, painful jolts. Lydia hadn't stumbled onto an honest misunderstanding. She had deliberately sought out and used a decades-old, buried family secret to gain power and control. She wasn't just a spiteful daughter-in-law. She was a clever, calculating conspirator. She took the information that Aaron wasn't Richard's son, the unknown father detail, and warped it into a story that I was genetically sick, contagious, and a danger to her baby. This was psychological warfare of the highest order. She didn't just want me out of their lives. She wanted to destroy my reputation and my relationship with my son, making me out to be a toxic threat. I saw the whole conspiracy clearly now. She hadn't just humiliated me in the hospital room. She had executed a planned character assassination, using the most fragile piece of my family's history as her weapon. This realization didn't break me. It made me cold, determined, and utterly focused on payback. My next move was obvious. I had to find the original lab report Richard had tried to hide, the one Lydia had surely used. I went to the hospital archives where Richard had worked, presenting myself with a calm authority that I hoped would mask my inner turmoil. The receptionist, a young woman with tired eyes, looked at my request form for access to decades-old, sealed medical files. She typed a few keys, and then looked up at me with an expression of professional refusal. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Ellis, I can't grant you access. Your son, Aaron, signed a very specific privacy order 3 weeks ago restricting any access to family records, especially those pertaining to his infancy and paternity." I felt a deep, sickening lurch in my stomach. Aaron. He wasn't just ignoring me, he was actively, legally protecting Lydia's lie. He had used his legal authority to wall off the very truth I needed to expose his wife. My fists clenched until my nails dug into my palms. His action confirmed his full, heartbreaking commitment to Lydia and her malicious narrative. I felt the full weight of his betrayal, a betrayal that went deeper than just taking his wife's side. I called my old friend Clara, a woman with a vast network of connections in the city's elite social circles, and told her what little I dared, focusing on Lydia's cruelty. Clara listened, her voice worried when she spoke. "Gladys, be careful," she warned, her tone serious. "You know Lydia's father, Mr. Thorne? He's a powerful man. He practically funds that entire new hospital wing where your grandson was born. They'll protect her, Gladys. They have money, power, and influence in those medical and legal circles." Clara's warning only fueled my growing rage. This wasn't just a domestic dispute. This was a war against a wealthy, influential family determined to keep their secrets buried, even if it meant destroying an innocent grandmother. They thought they could use their money and connections to control the narrative. A thin, cold smile touched my lips. "Then I'll go hire Clara," I said, my voice dangerously calm. "They may control the hospital wing, but they don't control the fundamental rules of life." I realized that to win, I had to stop playing by their rules of secrecy and social pressure. I needed undeniable, modern, and legally sound evidence. I couldn't trust the old documents or the compromised hospital. I needed a new, undeniable truth. I knew what I had to do. With great difficulty, and using resources outside of our local network, an expensive and anonymous facility miles away, I arranged for new genetic testing. I quietly gathered a sample of my own DNA and, with even greater stealth, managed to secure a sample of Aaron's when I briefly visited his empty apartment to collect a few sentimental items Richard had given him. It felt illicit and desperate, but I had no other choice. The samples were sent away, along with the required paperwork. The waiting period was excruciating, a 5-day limbo where every minute stretched into an hour. The knowledge that the key to my redemption and my vengeance was locked away in a sealed lab thousands of miles away was almost unbearable. I walked around my house like a ghost, preparing for the battle, organizing my financial documents and gathering every piece of evidence of Lydia's campaign against me. The countdown had begun. 5 days later, while waiting for the results, fate decided to throw us together. I was at the upscale local grocery store, trying to maintain some semblance of normalcy, when I turned a corner and came face to face with Aaron and Lydia. Lydia, dressed in expensive athleisure wear, held her head high, radiating smug self-satisfaction. Aaron, pushing the cart, looked instantly uncomfortable and guilty. He avoided my eyes, focusing intently on a bag of organic apples. Lydia, however, did not miss the opportunity. She glared at me, her expression a mix of triumph and contempt, as if daring me to speak. I looked back at her, not with sadness or fear, but with a cold, clear resolve she hadn't seen before. I didn't raise my voice or make a scene. I just held her gaze for a long moment, then shifted my eyes to Aaron. Just loud enough for him to hear over the store's soft background music, I whispered, "You'll know the truth soon, Aaron. A truth that will change everything." Then, without waiting for a reply, I walked away, leaving them standing frozen in the produce aisle, the knowledge of my impending action hanging heavily between them. I was back in my home office, compiling a list of every single person Lydia had lied to when the phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, a state code I didn't recognize. I hesitated, then answered. The voice on the other end was formal, professional, and chillingly serious. "Is this Mrs. Gladys Ellis? This is Dr. Sterling from the National Genetic Services. We have received your results regarding the samples you submitted." My heart leaped into my throat. The professional calm of the doctor's voice cracked slightly when she continued. "Mrs. Ellis, your test results are ready, and there's something we need to discuss privately. This is highly unusual, and I would prefer to have a secure video conference or an in-person meeting." The warning implicit in her tone, the sudden shift from routine reporting to urgent, private discussion, told me instantly that the truth I had sought was far bigger and more shocking than the simple confirmation of Richard's non-paternity. My hands began to shake again, but this time, it wasn't from sadness. It was from the exhilarating, terrifying realization that I was on the brink of an explosive discovery. The next day, I found myself sitting in a sterile, impersonal hospital office miles away from Davenport. Dr. Sterling, the geneticist, was a no-nonsense woman with sharp, intelligent eyes. She didn't waste time on pleasantries. She slid the official report across the table to me, highlighting certain key fields with a careful, precise finger. Mrs. Ellis, the first finding confirms the old report. Your late husband is not Aaron's biological father. However, the second finding is the one that concerns us. We ran a deeper, familial analysis on Aaron's paternal markers. She paused, her eyes searching mine for strength. The markers indicate a very high probability, over 99.9%, that Aaron is biologically related to someone in your extended family's recent history. Specifically, a first-degree relative to your daughter-in-law, Lydia. The room felt suddenly too small, too hot. My head swam. Richard's frantic behavior, the switched reports, Lydia's hostility, her father's power in the hospital, it all crashed together. I whispered the question, barely able to form the words. A first-degree relative? But who? Dr. Sterling looked profoundly uneasy, clearly uncomfortable delivering this bomb of a revelation. She leaned forward, lowering her voice despite the privacy of the room. Based on the unique markers and the documented relationships we were able to cross-reference, including the public records of Lydia's family, the results are conclusive, Mrs. Ellis. She paused one final, devastating time, delivering the ultimate twist. Your son's biological father is Lydia's father, Mr. Robert Thorne. The revelation hit me with the force of a wrecking ball. The room spun, the sterile white walls blurring into a dizzying circle. Not only was Aaron not Richard's son, but his paternity was tied to the very family that was now trying to destroy me. The lies weren't just cruel, they were incestuous, shocking, and profoundly illegal if Mr. Thorne had deliberately manipulated the original records to hide the truth. My gasp was choked off by the sheer magnitude of the secret. Lydia knew the truth about Aaron's father all along. This wasn't a custody battle, it was a decades-long criminal conspiracy. I stumbled out of the hospital, the crisp, late spring air doing nothing to clear the fog of shock that enveloped me. The truth, heavy and suffocating, weighed on me like a physical burden. Aaron was the biological son of Robert Thorne, Lydia's own father. This meant Lydia and Aaron were half-siblings. The realization was horrifying, vile, and completely explained the lengths to which Thorne and Lydia would go to keep me silent. The lies Lydia had been spreading, the genetic illness and contamination narrative, weren't just cruel, they were a desperate attempt to create distance, a wall of public revulsion to cover up their own terrible, incestuous secret. Lydia hadn't just been protecting her marriage, she had been protecting a horrifying truth about her own family line. She had known the truth all along and still married Aaron, still had a child with him. The deceit was not just against me, it was against my entire, deceased husband's memory and the social foundation of our entire city. Back in the silent study, I tore through Richard's old papers, feeling a frantic urgency. The DNA report proved the what. I needed Richard's perspective on the why. Deep within the false bottom of his filing cabinet, I found it. A small, leather-bound journal he had always kept private. I flipped through the pages until I found the last entry, dated just 1 week before his sudden death. Richard's usually elegant handwriting was shaky, almost illegible, but the words were devastatingly clear. I found out. I know about Thorne and the child. I confronted him, and he confessed to manipulating the initial reports. I can't live with the shame. It would destroy Gladys. Protect her. My heart shattered all over again. My poor husband hadn't died from a sudden heart attack. He had died from a broken heart, unable to live with the knowledge of the paternity and the massive conspiracy surrounding his beloved son. He had taken the burden of the truth to the grave, believing he was protecting me. He knew, and because of his silence, Lydia and her father had been allowed to perpetuate this monster of a lie. The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. Robert Thorne, a powerful, wealthy man, must have had an affair with Aaron's biological mother, whoever she was, years before I met Richard, or perhaps during the early days of our marriage. When Richard discovered the truth through that private DNA test, Thorne used his immense influence to bury the paternity results and rewrite the initial hospital records, making it seem like a harmless lab error, or perhaps shifting the blame. He had done it to protect his reputation and his family's immense wealth, allowing Richard to believe he was protecting me by remaining silent. But Thorne hadn't stopped there. He allowed his own daughter, Lydia, to marry her half-brother, Aaron, fully aware of the biological truth. The sheer scale of the deception and the chilling willingness of Thorne to sacrifice his children's well-being for the sake of his reputation was utterly monstrous. The emotional turmoil had now calcified into cold, absolute resolve. I had the complete truth and the evidence of a decades-long conspiracy, not just against me, but against my late husband. The time for whispering and hiding was over. I drove straight to Aaron and Lydia's home, entering the front door with the spare key I still possessed. I found Lydia alone in the living room, looking smug and relaxed. I stood over her, my gaze unwavering. "I know who Aaron's father really is, Lydia," I stated, my voice dangerously level. Her face instantly went pale, the color draining away as if pulled by gravity. Her eyes darted wildly, searching for a way out. She tried to recover quickly, her voice laced with a desperate threat. "If you destroy this family, you destroy your son, Gladys. You'll ruin him forever." I stared at her, utterly disgusted by her final, desperate attempt at gaslighting. "You already did that, Lydia," I replied. "The family was destroyed the day you married your half-brother. I'm just exposing the wreckage." The confrontation was escalating quickly. Lydia, cornered, dropped the victim act and turned feral, her denials becoming shrill and panicked. She screamed that I was insane, that I was fabricating evidence, that the grief of losing Richard had finally made me snap. This was exactly what I needed. I had placed my phone on the coffee table just before I spoke, ensuring the audio recorder was running. I watched her rage, allowing her to incriminate herself further. Her denial shifted quickly to panic, and then, in a moment of utter despair and blind fury, she shouted, "My father told me to hide it. He paid everyone off. You'll never find proof." The confession, the admission that her father was complicit in a massive cover-up, was now crystal clear on the recording. I quietly stopped the recording and slipped the phone into my pocket. I had the proof, not just the genetic evidence, but her own confession. The justice had officially begun. She thought she was playing chess with a checkers player, but she was about to learn I held the key to her entire family's ruin. I spent the next 48 hours setting the stage for the public fall. My first move was an invitation. I called Aaron, using a voice filled with concern but absolute firmness. "Aaron, I need to see the baby. I want us to have a peace dinner, just family. I know things have been difficult, but for the sake of your son, we need to talk." Aaron, worn down by his wife's paranoia and likely feeling guilty, reluctantly agreed. Lydia, smelling a trap but unable to resist the chance to further control the narrative, arrived with him, maintaining a smug, superior look. I poured the wine, offering a toast to the future of our family. As they raised their glasses, I smiled gently. "Before we eat," I said, my voice soft but commanding attention, "there's something we need to clear up, especially regarding the genetic contamination claims Lydia has been spreading." The tension in the dining room was so thick you could cut it with a knife. This was it, the moment of reckoning. The truth is about to destroy their entire world. If you want to see how Gladys finally achieves her deep, satisfying justice, please like this video and hit subscribe for more true revenge stories. I didn't give them a chance to speak. I reached into my purse, pulled out my phone, and connected it wirelessly to the living room speakers. The room was silent as I hit play. First, they heard Lydia's voice, sharp and panicked, screaming about the need to hide the truth. Then, the clear, undeniable admission. "My father told me to hide it. He paid everyone off." But I played the final, most devastating segment, the part where Lydia screamed the biological relationship in her fury at me. "Your father is my father." Her recorded voice echoed through the room like a gunshot. Aaron's wine glass, which he was holding midair, dropped from his numb fingers, shattering on the polished wood floor. He looked at Lydia, then at me, then back at the shards, his face a mask of utter horror. The sudden noise of the glass breaking, coupled with the echoing confession, startled the baby in the next room. His cry started immediately, loud and desperate, mirroring the chaos in the room. The silence after the recording ended was absolute, broken only by the baby's wails. Lydia, recovering first, leaped to her feet, screaming, "She's lying. It's fabricated. She's mentally ill." But I was prepared. I calmly slid the official, stamped envelope containing the modern genetic test results across the table to Aaron. "It's all right there, Aaron. It's confirmed. Read it." Aaron's hands trembled violently as he picked up the paper. He didn't even need to read the full report. His eyes flew straight to the familial match section. The color drained completely from his face, leaving him a ghastly, ashen shade. He didn't scream or rage. He only whispered, his voice cracked and hollow, "Oh my God!" The magnitude of his father's betrayal, his wife's monstrous deceit, and the awful, sickening truth of their relationship finally slammed into him. Lydia, seeing her last defense crumble, stood paralyzed, realizing she had nothing left. Lydia didn't stay to face the music. The moment Aaron looked at her with pure, unadulterated revulsion. She knew it was over. She grabbed her designer bag and fled the house, slamming the door shut. Aaron, my poor son, collapsed into his chair, the paper still clutched in his hand, and began to sob, great, wrenching, heartbroken sounds of betrayal and shame. It was the sound of his entire life being dismantled. I didn't press the attack. The vengeance was complete. I simply knelt beside him, my eyes wet with a mixture of my own pain and deep maternal pity. I placed a hand gently on his shoulder, letting him weep. You didn't know, I whispered, confirming the truth he desperately needed to hear. Your father, Richard, protected you. But you know now, and now we can heal. We will fix this. It was the first time in months that I had touched him, and the contact, though heartbreaking, was real and true. The wheels of justice, once set in motion, moved with frightening speed, fueled by the evidence of medical fraud and incestuous conspiracy. I gave the recording and the DNA results to the authorities anonymously at first, using a lawyer outside of the city. The investigation quickly exposed Robert Thorne's decades of falsified medical records, using his hospital funds to silence the true story of Aaron's paternity and to cover up his affair. The financial paper trail was irrefutable. Just 2 weeks after the dinner, I watched the evening news in my quiet living room. The headline flashed across the screen. Prominent hospital benefactor, Robert Thorne, arrested for fraud and conspiracy. His reputation, his money, and his power had not been enough to protect him from the truth. I watched silently, feeling no joy, only a profound sense of closure. My husband, Richard, had finally found justice, and the architect of my humiliation had found his fate. This was the end of the line for the Thorne dynasty. The days after the revelation were devoted entirely to healing. Aaron, shattered by the monumental scale of the deceit, immediately separated from Lydia. He temporarily moved back into his childhood home with me, needing the quiet space and maternal comfort to process the fact that the man he thought was his biological father, Richard, was not, and that his actual father was a criminal conspiracy master who also happened to be his wife's father. It was a trauma that required professional help, and Aaron wisely threw himself into therapy. Meanwhile, I found solace in my grandson. Since Lydia had fled, Aaron, still fragile, would prop the baby up during our video calls. The small, innocent face was a balm to my soul. Slowly, miraculously, the baby began recognizing my voice, turning his head when he heard my familiar, soft tone. The bond Lydia had tried to sever was reforming, stronger than ever. One quiet afternoon, months after the dinner, a profound moment of reconciliation arrived. Aaron had been holding the baby, rocking him near the window, a silent, contemplative look on his face. He walked over to me, where I sat on the sofa reading, and gently, deliberately placed the infant in my arms. The baby was warm and solid, a healthy weight that felt beautiful and right. I looked up at Aaron, tears blurring my vision. He didn't say much, but what he did say was everything. You're his only real family, Mom. His true blood. The words weren't about genetics. They were about loyalty, love, and truth. I held my grandson close, burying my face in his soft-smelling neck, and cried silently. They were not tears of pain, but of cathartic release. The injustice was dissolving, replaced by the profound, quiet realization that I had won the only thing that truly mattered, my son and my grandson. The media storm surrounding the Thorne family was relentless and complete. The local news, followed by national outlets, exposed the full extent of the scandal, the DNA manipulation, the medical corruption, and the decades of child identity fraud orchestrated by Robert Thorne. The revelation that Lydia had knowingly married her half-brother added a layer of horrific detail that destroyed the Thorne name forever. In stark contrast, my name, Gladys Ellis, the kind grandmother accused of being toxic and sick, was entirely cleared. Newspaper articles ran retractions, interviews, and public apologies. The community that had once whispered about my supposed illness now rallied around me, offering support and respect. My reputation, built on decades of honesty, was not just restored, it was elevated. The social justice Lydia had tried to deny me was now served up publicly and unequivocally. The legal proceedings moved quickly towards an inevitable conclusion. Aaron filed for divorce, and given the compelling evidence of fraud and the incestuous nature of their relationship, he was immediately awarded full custody of his son. Lydia, unable to face the criminal charges or the public humiliation, quietly vanished overseas, allegedly under investigation for her own part in covering up her father's crimes. My victory was not measured in financial gain, but in the swift, irreversible dismantling of the perpetrators' lives. Aaron was free, the baby was safe, and the woman who had weaponized a terrible secret was gone. The court's ruling affirmed the triumph of truth over calculated deceit. My late husband Richard's legacy was the final piece of the healing puzzle. He had left me a substantial amount of his professional savings, money that had been designated for a special, secret fund. I decided to use that fund to honor his integrity. I established a large endowment in his name, the Dr. Richard Ellis Fund for DNA Rights Advocacy, dedicated to fighting medical corruption and helping families navigate paternity fraud. This was my true revenge. I wasn't just taking back my happiness. I was making sure that the very crime Robert Thorne had committed would now be actively fought against using Thorne's own victims' resources. I watched the press conference where the fund was announced, a quiet, powerful smile on my face. I was invited to speak at the formal launch of the DNA Rights Advocacy Fund in the City Council chambers. The room was packed with people who had once doubted me. I stood at the podium, drawing strength from the memory of Richard and the innocence of my grandson. My voice was calm and measured, carrying a quiet, authoritative power. For a long time, I was told I was sick. I was told I was toxic. My reputation was ruined by a lie, I said, looking directly at the cameras. But what I learned is this: truth isn't just science. It's the courage to face what's been hidden. My late husband tried to protect that truth, and today we continue his fight. We will not let powerful people use medical secrecy to hurt families. It was a quiet, devastating statement that validated my entire journey and offered hope to others who might be facing similar, unseen battles. Months later, my life found a new, quiet rhythm. Aaron was thriving in therapy, dedicated to being the best father he could be, and I was an active, essential figure in my grandson's life. We hired a professional photographer to take a new family portrait. It featured me, seated and serene, with Aaron standing proudly beside me, his hand resting reassuringly on my shoulder, and the baby nestled securely in my arms. Peace had finally replaced the pain and the betrayal. The photo was a symbol of our resilience, a family built not on blood and deceit, but on the bedrock of rediscovered truth and enduring love. Dr. Patel, Richard's old colleague, visited me soon after the fund was established. He looked relieved, the worry finally lifted from his eyes. We sat in the study, now bright and filled with light, not the oppressive shadows of the past. I always felt guilty for keeping Richard's secret, he confessed. But he truly believed he was protecting you from the social ruin that would follow. I nodded, understanding completely. He did try to protect me. I smiled sadly, acknowledging my husband's flawed, loving intent. But his silence allowed the lie to grow. The greatest protection is always the truth, Dr. Patel, no matter how hard it is. I rearranged the mantelpiece, replacing the old, solitary photograph of Richard. Now, 2 photographs stood side by side, perfectly framed. The first was an old, faded picture. My late husband, Richard, holding baby Aaron, radiating the pure, genuine love of a father for his son. The second was the new family portrait, me, holding my grandson, surrounded by the clear light of redemption. Beneath them, I placed a small, engraved brass plaque bearing a quote that captured the essence of my long, brutal fight. Blood doesn't define love, truth does. It was a testament to Richard's love, Aaron's honesty, and the integrity I had fought to preserve. The sun streamed through the nursery window, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. I held my grandson, now asleep, his small, warm body heavy and comforting in my arms. I looked down at his perfect, peaceful face. My voiceover was a soft, final whisper, a closing affirmation of my victory. They said I couldn't hold my grandchild. They said I was toxic, sick, and dangerous. They used lies and a terrible secret to try and push me away. I kissed the top of his head, feeling the soft down of his hair against my lips. But truth has a way of finding its way home. And in the end, he came back to me. Thank you for following my story to its final, satisfying conclusion. If my journey inspired you, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments.